ever get that feeling? You know that feeling when you're about to read a book and it's fascinating, but it's also like really intimidating.
Yeah, definitely.
It's kind of how I feel about Michel Serres. Like, brilliant guy, super interesting ideas.
Oh, absolutely.
But not always the easiest to just like pick up and understand, you know?
Yeah, he makes you work for it. He really does.
Definitely makes you work for it. But this deep dive, we're going for aha moments, but hopefully without the mental gymnastics, hopefully.
I like it.
You shared some excerpts from Hermes III translation.
Yeah.
And honestly, I gotta say, once you get past like some of the surface level stuff, the way he sees knowledge, it's kind of mind-blowing.
Yeah, he had a very, very unique way of looking at things. And it's tough to summarize because he really does connect everything to everything else. But one of the core things about Serres is that he doesn't see knowledge as something that's static. You know, it's not just like a collection of facts.
Right.
He sees it as a process, a kind of translation, actually.
Okay, so when we say translation here, we're obviously not just talking about like switching between French and English.
Right.
What's the deeper meaning there?
Right. Exactly, yeah. He's using it more broadly. It's more about how we transfer knowledge, but also energy, even power, from one realm to another. And he has this really interesting example where he talks about the minuscule energy that it takes to like write something down.
Right.
Versus the sheer force needed for something like physical labor.
Okay, so like me scribbling notes in the margins of this book versus like the ancient Egyptians building the pyramids.
Exactly. Yes. And Serres uses that difference to kind of help explain the historical development of things like slavery and, you know, our desire to kind of dominate nature.
Wow. Yeah.
It's not just about brute force, he's saying. It's about this translation of knowledge into power.
Okay, I see where we're going with this, and suddenly my to-do list seems a lot less intimidating than like building the pyramids. But I mean, seriously though, this idea that knowledge equals control, that's a big claim.
It is a big claim, and it's really at the heart of what he wants us to understand, because when we start to see these translations happening all around us, we gain a new understanding of how knowledge itself has been used throughout history.
Yeah.
It's not just about understanding the world, it's about shaping it. It's about, you know, bending it to our will in a lot of ways.
So just to be clear, when Serres is talking about translation here, he's not just talking about languages, right?
Yeah.
We're talking about a fundamental way that humans interact with the world.
Exactly. And understanding that is kind of key to unlocking so much of his work, which is what makes, I think, this next part so fascinating. Yeah. Because what Serres was famous for was finding these translations, these connections in the most unexpected places.
So we've established that Serres sees the world as this, like, I don't know, this web of translations.
Yeah, this network of relationships.
But where things get really interesting to me, and I think to a lot of people, is how he finds those connections in the most random places.
Yeah.
It's like he's playing this cosmic game of connect the dots.
Yeah.
But instead of stars, it's like everything is fair game.
It's true. And the excerpts that you sent, you know, he's drawing these parallels between, like, Renaissance paintings and scientific principles, and then he's linking mythology to information theory.
Wow. Yeah.
And at one point, he even talks about finding mathematical theorems, like actual theorems, embedded in artwork.
Okay, wait, hold on a second. Theorems in artwork. I love a good art museum, but that sounds like we are venturing into like really deep thought territory here.
Right?
How can a painting have a theorem?
Well, and that's, I think, where Serres really, like, challenges our assumptions about how we usually categorize knowledge, right?
Okay.
He's not just being poetic here. I mean, he really believes that there are these underlying structures of thought that kind of repeat across these wildly different disciplines. So just like a geometric theorem, you know, like Pythagorean theorem.
Right.
Reveals this fundamental truth about the relationship between the sides of a right triangle. Yeah. He argues that similar theorems exist in art, in mythology, and even just in, like, our everyday experiences.
So it's not just about like finding pretty patterns or metaphors. He's saying these connections actually like reveal something much deeper about like how we think as humans.
Exactly. Yeah. He's getting at the structure of thought itself.
Wow.
And a really good example of this that he uses is his analysis of this Nicolas Poussin painting.
Okay.
It's called The Feeding of the Child Jupiter.
I'll be honest, I had to Google that one.
That's okay. It's a pretty obscure painting.
It's a cool painting, though, I gotta say.
It's a beautiful painting, and he uses it to kind of illustrate this point perfectly, right?
Yeah.
He says that every single element in this painting, from like the arrangement of the figures to like the flowing milk and honey.
Right.
It points to this central theorem about cyclical exchange, right? So the idea of giving and receiving life and nourishment, kind of this constant renewal.
So every detail, every brushstroke is like this little clue to this bigger idea.
Exactly, yeah. And by understanding this theorem, this underlying structure, Serres believes we can then get a much richer understanding,
right,
not only of the painting itself, but also how these recurring patterns pop up in mythology and biology, even in things like economics.
Wow. Yeah.
They all touch on these fundamental patterns of exchange and regeneration.
That's kind of incredible, though. It's like he's giving us a whole new way to see not just art, but to see the world.
Exactly.
And suddenly art isn't just about like aesthetics. It's like this window into these deeper truths about like how systems work, how everything interacts.
Precisely. Yeah. He doesn't see these disciplines as separate.
Right.
And that's what makes him so relevant, I think, even today.
Yeah.
He's challenging us to look beyond just the surface, to see the connections between these seemingly very different areas of study and to recognize those underlying patterns that really shape our understanding of the world.
It's almost like he's saying knowledge itself isn't confined to these like neat little boxes.
Right.
That we try to put it in.
We try to impose that order, but it's messier than that. And that's a really powerful idea, but it's one that also comes, I think, with a certain weight, a sense of responsibility.
It's funny, we started talking about how intimidating Serres can be.
Yeah.
But I don't know, I'm starting to see the beauty in it.
Yeah.
Right? Like seeing the world as this kind of interconnected web of meaning.
Yeah, it's a very holistic view.
It's very holistic, it's very beautiful, but Serres doesn't shy away from the implications of this, right? Like, especially when we start talking about knowledge and power.
Right.
And I mean, remember, he's writing in the aftermath of World War II.
Exactly.
A time when, the destructive potential of knowledge, especially scientific knowledge, is like terrifyingly clear.
It was really in the forefront. Yeah.
Yeah. So, he has this one line where he warns that scientists, in their pursuit of knowledge, could unwittingly contribute to the, and this is a quote, suicide of humanity.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, that's a heavy thought.
It's a very heavy thought.
Especially given, everything that's happened even since then.
Yeah, even just since the time of his writing.
So, I mean, how do we reconcile those two things? Like this sense of wonder.
Right.
But also this kind of like cautionary note.
Yeah, and I think that's where his emphasis on critical thinking is so important, right? He doesn't want us to fear knowledge itself.
Right.
But rather to be aware of how it's used, how it's translated into these different forms of power.
So it's like, with great power comes great responsibility.
Exactly, for knowledge.
But for knowledge, exactly.
Yes.
And, part of that is asking why is this knowledge being sought? Who's going to benefit from this knowledge? And what could the unintended consequences be? And those are questions that, I think, especially in the sciences, sometimes we kind of forget to ask.
Yeah, it's easy to get really excited about new developments and discoveries and forget to kind of step back and ask those bigger questions.
For sure. But as, just people living in the world trying to make sense of it all, it feels like every day there's a new headline.
Right.
It's AI, it's climate change.
Yeah.
It's, this new technology that could either be, amazingly good or could be used for, not so good things.
Right. It can feel very overwhelming.
Yeah. So as an individual, where do you even begin to grapple with that?
Yeah. It's tough, but I think that's precisely why Serres' work is so relevant, because he's reminding us that we're not just these passive recipients of information.
Right.
We have the power to question, to analyze, to consider different perspectives, and in doing so, we can become, more conscious participants in how knowledge is shaped and how it's used.
So it's not about retreating from the world,
right.
or giving up on knowledge altogether. It's about engaging with it.
Yes.
But in a more mindful way, in a more questioning way.
Exactly, yeah. Being more conscious, more critical.
So recognizing those translations that are happening.
That are happening all around us.
Whether it's our daily lives, the media we consume, everything.
The technology we use.
And just stopping to ask, okay, what's being exchanged here?
Mm-hmm.
Who benefits and how does that change my understanding of the world?
Precisely. Yeah. And that's something we can all do, regardless of our background.
It's true. And I don't know, I think for someone who, wrote so much about these really complex ideas, he really does kind of boil it down to something very simple, which is think critically ask questions, and pay attention.
Be aware of those translations happening.
Exactly, because knowledge is power.
And it's a message that I think is just as relevant today as it was, when he was writing, 50, 60 years ago.
Oh, absolutely, if not more so.
Maybe even more so, right? Yeah.
Yeah, given the pace of technological change today.
That's a great point.
I think it's more important than ever. So there you have it, folks. A deep dive into the mind of Michel Serres.
His fascinating mind.
Honestly, not always easy to follow.
No.
Definitely made us think, though.
Yeah.
Hopefully you learned something new. We certainly did.
Always do.
But before we go, we'd like to leave you with something to think about.
Always.
So we're going to do that again today. And in the spirit of Serres, we want to challenge you to do a little translation of your own.
I love it.
So think about something that you consider knowledge.
Okay.
It could be anything. It could be a scientific theory. It could be a piece of art, a historical event, a news story you heard this morning, whatever.
A conversation you had with a friend.
Exactly. Now try to look at it, whatever it is, through that lens of translation. What is being exchanged? Who benefits? And how does that change your understanding of that thing, whatever it is you chose?
I like it. Yeah.
Keep those questions in mind. And until next time, happy deep diving.